Right now, somewhere in your house, or maybe in someone else's house down the street, there's an animal sleeping on a couch that is, genetically speaking, a wolf. Not a metaphorical wolf, not a distant cousin of a wolf, an actual wolf, reshaped over tens of thousands of years into something that will lick your face and wait by the door for you to come home. That transformation is one of the strangest, oldest, and most successful partnerships in the entire history of life on Earth. And it happened so long ago that we're still not entirely sure how it started, or exactly when, or which side of the relationship deserves more credit for making the first move. So here's the real question. How do you take one of the most efficient predators on the planet, an animal built to hunt in coordinated packs and bring down prey many times its own size, and end up with something that sleeps at the foot of your bed? Because that's not a small transformation. That's one of the most dramatic behavioral shifts any species has ever undergone. And it happened before agriculture, before pottery, before humans had permanently settled down anywhere at all. Start with the basic biology, because it matters more than you'd think. Wolves and dogs share the vast majority of their DNA. Genetically, they're close enough that they can still interbreed today and produce fertile offspring. That means, in the strictest biological sense, your dog isn't descended from some entirely separate species. It's descended from wolves, full stop. Just wolves that changed dramatically over an extremely long stretch of time. Researchers still argue heavily over exactly when that split happened. Genetic studies estimate the divergence somewhere between roughly 40,000 and 15,000 years ago. And the range is wide because different genetic methods and different fossil sites keep producing different numbers. What almost everyone agrees on is this: dogs were domesticated long before any other animal humans ever tamed. Sheep, goats, cattle, all of that came later, tied to agriculture and permanent settlements. Dogs came first, while humans were still nomadic hunter-gatherers, which raises an obvious question. If you don't have a farm, if you don't have surplus grain, if you're barely settled anywhere yourself, why would you take in a wolf? The traditional answer used to be simple. Humans found wolf puppies, raised them by hand, and gradually bred the tamest ones together. It's a tidy story. It's also, according to a lot of researchers now, probably not what actually happened, or at least not the whole story. The more widely supported theory today is usually called self-domestication, and it flips the entire narrative around. Instead of humans reaching out and choosing wolves, wolves may have chosen us. Picture an ancient human campsite. There's a fire, there's regular activity, and unavoidably, there's trash. Bones, scraps, the leftover parts of whatever was hunted that week. That kind of steady, predictable food source would have been genuinely attractive to any wolf smart enough to notice it. But approaching a human camp is dangerous. Get too close, and a nervous or aggressive wolf risks getting speared. So a strange kind of natural selection would have kicked in almost immediately, entirely without any human intention behind it. The wolves with slightly calmer temperaments, the ones with a little less fear and a little less aggression toward humans, could get closer to the food without triggering violence. Over generations, that small advantage compounds. The wolves who could tolerate human presence ate more reliably, survived better, and passed that same tolerant temperament on to their pups. Humans weren't selecting wolves at all in this version of the story. Tameness itself was quietly getting selected for, automatically, generation after generation, just by which wolves could handle being near people without panicking or attacking. Nobody planned any of it. Nobody sat down and decided to breed a friendlier wolf. The whole process ran on nothing more than which individual wolves happened to have a personality that let them tolerate proximity to campfires and the smell of humans, repeated across enough generations that the accumulated effect eventually became impossible to miss. Here's where a completely different kind of evidence steps in, and it comes from a laboratory, not an archaeological dig. In 1959, Soviet geneticist Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment on silver foxes at a research farm in Siberia, and it's still running today, more than 60 years later. Belyaev bred foxes for exactly one trait: tameness toward humans, nothing else. Not size, not coat color, not any physical feature at all, just calm behavior around people. Within a shockingly small number of generations, something strange started happening. The tame foxes didn't just act friendlier. Their physical appearance began changing too. Their ears started flopping instead of standing upright. Their tails curled. Patches of white started showing up in their fur. Their skulls even became slightly smaller and more rounded. None of that was deliberately bred for. Belyaev never selected for floppy ears or curly tails. He only selected for calm behavior, and all of those physical traits came along for the ride anyway. Tightly linked to tameness at some deep biological level, scientists are still working to fully understand. Researchers now suspect the connection runs through something called neural crest cells, a group of cells active early in embryonic development that influence a huge range of traits at once. Everything from pigment production to skull shape to the hormones tied to stress and fear. Selecting hard for one single behavior, calmness, may end up dragging along a whole cluster of seemingly unrelated physical changes simply because they all trace back to the same early developmental pathway. This pattern even has a name now, domestication syndrome, and it shows up to varying degrees in nearly every domesticated species on Earth, not just foxes. Floppy ears, patches of white or piebald fur, curled tails, traits that show up again and again specifically in animals humans have tamed, and rarely in their wild relatives. Which means, if wolves really did self-domesticate the same way, you'd expect to see those same physical shifts showing up gradually in the archaeological and genetic record. And that's more or less exactly what researchers do find. Now let's actually look at that record directly, because the physical evidence tells its own remarkable story. At a site called Goyer Cave in Belgium, researchers examined a skull dating back roughly 36,000 years that shows features distinct from wolves of that same era. A shorter snout, wider palate, and other structural differences suggesting it might represent one of the earliest steps toward domestication. That specific find remains genuinely controversial among researchers, and some argue it may simply represent an unusual wolf population rather than an early proto-dog. Science doesn't move in a straight line here, and honest uncertainty is part of the actual story. Better supported evidence comes from Przedmosty, in what's now the Czech Republic, dating to roughly 26,000 years ago. Researchers there found a skull with shortened facial features, clearly distinct from local wolves, and inside its mouth, a bone fragment had been deliberately placed after death. That detail matters enormously. Someone took the time to place an object directly into this animal's mouth as part of its burial, a gesture that suggests something well beyond simple utility. You don't perform a small burial ritual for an animal you view purely as a tool. And then there's a discovery that might be the single most emotionally direct piece of evidence in this entire story. At a site called Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, dating back roughly 14,000 years, archaeologists found a joint burial. A man, a woman, and a dog, buried together deliberately at the same time in the same grave. Analysis of the dog's teeth revealed something striking. It had survived a severe illness, likely canine distemper, a disease that would have left it extremely sick and almost certainly unable to hunt or forage effectively for weeks at a stretch. And yet, it lived. Someone fed and cared for a sick, non-functional animal for an extended period with no immediate practical payoff, purely, as far as the evidence suggests, because they were attached to it. 14,000 years ago, someone loved a dog enough to nurse it through a serious illness and enough to be buried beside it when they themselves eventually died. That kind of emotional bond raises a genuinely fascinating biological question. What exactly makes the connection between humans and dogs so different from the connection between humans and any other domesticated animal? Because it clearly is different. Nobody gets choked up watching old home movies of a childhood cow. In 2015, a team of researchers led by Takefumi Kikusui in Japan published findings that helped explain part of it. When dogs and their human owners gaze into each other's eyes, both species experience a measurable spike in oxytocin, the same hormone strongly associated with parent-infant bonding in humans. That's an actual physiological feedback loop. The human looks at the dog, oxytocin rises in both of them. The dog looks back, oxytocin rises again. round and round, reinforcing the exact same bonding chemistry that ties a parent to a newborn child. As far as researchers can tell, that particular interspecies loop, triggered specifically through mutual eye contact, doesn't happen this way between humans and wolves, even wolves raised by hand from birth. It seems to be something dogs specifically evolved somewhere along their long path away from their wild ancestors. There's another striking difference that shows up in behavioral studies, and it's honestly a little humbling. Point at something, an object across the room, a spot on the ground, and a dog will reliably follow that gesture with its eyes and often its whole body. That sounds simple, almost too obvious to mention. It isn't. Chimpanzees, one of our closest living relatives, genetically far closer to humans than dogs are, generally fail this exact task. So do wolves, even wolves raised in close human contact from puppyhood. Even human infants only a few months old can follow a pointing finger reliably. And it turns out dogs, despite being a completely different species separated from us by tens of millions of years of evolution, do it just as naturally. Researcher Brian Hare has spent years studying this specific gap, and his research suggests dogs may have evolved a genuinely unique sensitivity to human communication and gesture, something that isn't simply about raw intelligence, since chimps are plainly smarter by most conventional measures. It's about a very specific kind of social attentiveness toward humans, one that appears to be baked directly into dogs at a level wolves, despite sharing the overwhelming majority of the same genome, simply don't have. Once that partnership was fully established, it paid off in ways that mattered enormously for human survival. A dog's sense of smell is estimated to be somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 times more sensitive than a human's, depending on the specific breed and study. For a group of ancient hunters, having an animal nearby that could detect prey long before any human eye or ear ever could was an enormous practical advantage. A hunting party moving with dogs could track wounded game across terrain and weather conditions that would have completely defeated human senses alone, following a scent trail hours old across ground already crossed by dozens of other animals. Dogs could also serve as an early warning system, alerting a sleeping camp to approaching predators or unfamiliar humans long before real danger actually arrived, buying precious extra minutes that, across enough dangerous nights, likely made the difference between a group that survived and one that didn't. And in genuinely difficult, unforgiving environments, particularly across the Arctic, dogs eventually became a form of transportation itself, pulling sleds and hauling loads across terrain that would otherwise have been nearly impossible to cross efficiently on foot, opening up entire regions of the planet that would have remained far harder to inhabit without them. This wasn't a one-time, single-location event either. As humans spread out across nearly every continent on Earth, dogs went with them, consistently, almost everywhere they went. Genetic studies of ancient dog remains found across Europe, Asia, and the Americas show clear evidence of a long, tangled history of different dog populations moving alongside different human populations, sometimes mixing together, sometimes staying genetically distinct for long stretches, but always closely following the same basic pattern. Wherever humans went, dogs generally went too. That's a remarkably consistent partnership to maintain across tens of thousands of years, radically different climates, and completely different specific human cultures. Here's a detail that might reframe the entire relationship. This wasn't simply humans domesticating an animal for pure usefulness, the way it happened later with sheep or cattle. The self-domestication theory suggests something closer to a slow, mutual negotiation stretched out across countless individual generations, of wolves and humans both, one where both species ultimately benefited, and where neither side was fully steering the outcome entirely on their own. Wolves got reliable access to food and a level of safety that came with proximity to organized, cooperative human groups. Humans got a genuinely capable hunting partner, an early warning system, and evidently, based on Bonn Oberkassel and sites like it, something that clearly felt a lot like real companionship even that early on. Modern genetics is now adding another remarkable layer to this story. Researchers have specifically studied the genes tied to hypersociability in dogs and found something genuinely surprising. Some of the exact same genetic regions involved show up altered in humans with Williams syndrome, a rare genetic condition strongly associated with unusually high sociability and an especially strong drive toward forming social bonds. It's a striking, if still not fully understood, genetic echo, suggesting that whatever process reshaped wolf brains into dog brains over that long stretch of time may share some deep underlying similarities with the biology of human social bonding itself. We may have been changed by this relationship every bit as much as dogs were. So, was there actually a single defining moment when a wolf became a dog? Almost certainly not, at least not in the dramatic, cinematic way we tend to imagine it. There was no single ancient hero who walked up to a wild wolf and decided, right then and there, to make it a companion. What actually happened was slower, messier, and in some ways, a great deal more interesting than that. It was thousands of years of wolves testing the edges of human tolerance, generation after generation, and thousands of years of humans slowly, unconsciously, allowing the calmest and least threatening ones to stay just a little bit closer each time. Somewhere inside that long, gradual, mutual negotiation, an entirely new relationship was born. One so successful, so deeply embedded in how humans actually live, that it has now survived intact for tens of thousands of years, all the way from an ancient hunting camp to a couch in your living room tonight. And that connection you might feel with a dog, the real physical pull of eye contact, the specific comfort of having one nearby, isn't some modern cultural invention or clever marketing built around a pet industry. It's an authentic evolutionary echo of one of the oldest, strangest, and most successful partnerships two entirely different species have ever managed to build together, quietly, side by side, for tens of thousands of years running. So, do you think you could have been the one to start it, sitting by a fire, tossing scraps to a wolf that wouldn't quite come close enough yet? Tell me honestly in the comments. If stories like this genuinely interest you, hit like. It helps the channel more than you'd probably think. And subscribe if you want more of how deep, strange, and genuinely ancient the ordinary parts of your life actually are.